Hey, what is going on, everyone? This is Jason Fitzgerald from overthecap.com. You can find me on Twitter at Jason_OTC. Or you can always email me, Jason at overthecap.com. We're back with another pretty big contract extension that we talked about a lot on OTC in the last week and a half, and really going all the way back to when this trade was first made by Seattle to acquire Jamal Adams from the New York Jets. And just to get some basics out of the way here, I mean, this is a pretty big deal, pretty much any way that you slice it. So if you look at this, I mean, 17.5 million annual value is the top number in the NFL right now among safeties. 38 million is guaranteed. That's also first in the NFL among safeties. $20 million signing bonus, tops in the NFL. The first two numbers are the highest in history for a safety. The signing bonus, I believe, ties two other players for tops ever. I think Earl Thomas and Eric Berry might have both gotten $20 million signing bonuses at one point. Finally, the 52.5 3-year cash is also the first in the NFL. So let's get to some breakdowns here, and we'll go through the numbers and just kind of run through some of the ins and outs of this contract and maybe look at how this deal got done and why it happened now versus, I guess, in the past. So this is a breakdown of the contract. Now, the breakdown of this contract comes from Pro Football Talk. Mike Florio is the one that had the details, so this is all thanks to him. So you can check out profootballtalk.com and you can see what the article is about, this particular contract. As is typical for the Seattle Seahawks, it's a very straightforward contract. They don't really get into the per game bonuses, workout bonuses, off-season stuff. Their contracts are relatively straightforward throughout. You will see a couple per games depending on the players here and there. But basically, it's all paragraph 5 and bonus money. So this year he's going to make $1 million. He'll get a signing bonus of $20 million. That's going to prorate on the cap at $4 million per year. Next year, he has a $12.44 million option bonus that is guaranteed for injury. Basically, if they don't pick it up, it all jumps into his salary. His salary will jump up to $14.4 million. So it's basically protected as long as he is on the roster on the 5th day, I believe, of the waiver period. So like 5 days after the Super Bowl, this becomes guaranteed, as does this paragraph 5 salary. Again, that's very typical of the Seattle Seahawks. They do very favorable vesting schedules for their players. And that's the case here as well. You get into 2023. Now, I'm going to assume that this salary is actually about $40,000 less than this. And maybe I should just put that in there that way now. I could be wrong about that, but the numbers that Florio has work out to, if you look, a running new money total is $70.04 million. Unless I have some other mistake that's in there. So there's probably a good chance that the salary this year is $10.96 million. $2.56 million of that is guaranteed for injury. Again, those numbers, that salary becomes fully guaranteed if he's on the roster about 5 days after the Super Bowl. So you can see the cap numbers are really low in the first 2 years. I think this has become common right now in the NFL. This is a older style contract, and the reason for that is the salary cap obviously is down this year, and there's not going to be that kind of improvement in the cap next year. They already have a limit that's set on there, and I think teams are optimistic that they're going to hit that limit, but with a chance that games could potentially again have no fans if this Delta variant gets worse and states start to change some stuff. Who knows how that'll work out. So I think they're cautiously optimistic about 2022. But again, the cap isn't going to grow that much. So as you can see, he has a low cap number at $9.11 million. And then the numbers balloon up, 18, 23.6, and 24.6. This is the dead money schedule if he is cut before the vesting dates on those salaries. So obviously he's not going to get cut this year. 21 million dead. That would be stupid. If you go next year, it would have to be a catastrophe for him to be released. You'd be looking at 16 million dead because they would be able to cut before this option bonus is due. You paid him an extra 10.6 million. I would say this is incredibly unlikely. You cannot June 1 him because of the dates that these become guaranteed. They become guaranteed in February. June 1 is not available until the regular season begins. So don't think that you can June 1 him to somehow spread that hit out if things go really, really bad. So there's a little bit of protection if things go incredibly south, that they could do this. It won't be great, obviously, but there's a little bit of protection in the contract for Seattle if that's the case, and we'll talk about that when we get into their guarantee structure. I think that's I think that there are some things in there that might be notable, at least a little bit. When you get into the 2023 season, again, the dead money is $21.33 million. It'll be higher if they have to wait until the vesting date kicks in on that $2.56 million. You can add another $2.56 to that. You can see the number here. You only lose $3.26 million in cap space, give or take a little bit. So you can hold that out as a possibility, but it's probably not likely. First year that you would really likely look at a player like this to get cut on this style of contract would be here. It's 14.22 dead. The cap should be much higher in 2024. So as a percentage of the cap, that number would probably be the equivalent of something that's like 10 million this year, a little bit less than that. So you would save 9.4 on the cap, and that's a possibility. I would think, and obviously 2025. Those are all worst case scenarios, but it's kind of weird when you talk about worst case scenarios. That's the way that contracts work in the NFL. You usually don't get the best case scenario. More often than not, you get the worst case scenarios. Cash pay over the life of the contract, $21 million, $14.4, $10.9, $6, $16.5, $17.5. They have a front-loaded structure with the salaries in these 2 years. Basically, we look at the new money, and your running new money is $25 million through 1, 36 through 2, 52.5 through 3, and $70 million through 4. But I think the important thing that you want to look at here again is when you get to these turn years where there might be fear that he could be unhappy with his contract if the good happens and he's playing great. You want to have salaries here that are high enough to kind of help you a little bit. So one of the things is that when you're talking about a player that's got a $16.5 or $17.5 million salary, regardless of where the market is at that point in time, those are probably going to be high salaries. So it's going to be hard for him to feel, quote unquote, disrespected, as some veteran players will kind of refer to some of their contracts, based on the salary that he's going to earn. It would also prove difficult to hold out with those types of salaries because you'd be giving up a lot. So you're not going to hold out in 21, 22, 23. And I think this actually works as a pretty nice protection to keep from holding out in 2024 and 2025. It also has a big number that's in there, so that actually lets you work with some stuff. When you do another contract, you may not have to have a huge payout in that first year to make him happy. You're going to pay 17.5. You might be able to throw a number in there that would be like, again, 21 million, which is not a lot extra over his already contracted value, and he might be willing to do that. Guarantee structure here, it's kind of interesting, especially when you start to compare it with some other players. So it's 21 fully guaranteed at signing. I don't look much into that, even though that number is really low at 26.1% of the entire value of the contract. 47.3% of the total value of the contract is guaranteed for injury. His new guarantee is 27.6, new full guarantee 10.6. So that's 39.4 of his new total. New guarantee per year 6.9, 2.65 on the full. I look at these numbers a little bit and just say it's about protection. It's about Seattle having the possibility to pull out in the event of the worst, while still, having pretty meaningful cash flows if you're Jamal Adams. You can see the vesting dates here. So he's got 21 at signing. So 55% of his entire guarantee is paid out this year. Basically, the rest of it is earned in February of 22 and February of 23. He vests the entire amount. But when you go back to here, I think the important thing is so basically this is protected. These two, let's color these green. That's protected. This is guaranteed and this is guaranteed. So basically this stuff is not going anywhere. This is a partial. So this is just 2.56 of this salary. And obviously this salary is close to $11 million. So when you look at this number, in my mind, this is virtually guaranteed for him to earn. unless it's a complete fall off the log kind of scenario. They dealt with a scenario like that with Cam Chancellor a couple of years ago, where he signed a big extension, got hurt, and everything really went bad for them. So because it's only $2.56 million that's guaranteed, it does leave them options if you have worst case scenario kind of stuff, to where they could cut, as we talked about before. They could think about it, even though those numbers are pretty high. But I think the bigger thing that would be in the back of their mind would be to do something to where they would lower this salary a little bit more. Maybe he would go from $11 million in salary with the 256 guaranteed to something like $4 or $5 million. Again, it's just protection for worst case scenario type of stuff. So ultimately, I think Seattle did a nice job of just making sure they're protected for worst case scenario, while probably, not expecting that to happen. Now, one of the things that was brought up a lot with Jamal Adams was what would be the alternative options, where there was talks of him being franchise tagged and potentially being tagged as a linebacker. He had no chance of being tagged as a linebacker. I mean, there's just no way. He's always been a safety. He's always said he's a safety. It's very hard to do those positional changes. Occasionally it might work at like your edge rush between a 3-4 outside linebacker and a defensive end. And once in a while, interior defensive line being labeled as a defensive end, that's usually a much easier one to do, because more often than not, they're actually lined up outside. This would be crazy. So I looked up what I think the franchise tag numbers will be. And again, these are a little bit different than what we have on OTC. It's just some changes that I have in there. So what you see is on the extension, he's going to earn an extra 10.6 this year. By next year, he'll earn 25, then he'll earn 36, and then you have the 2 years after that. So if he played the franchise tag game out, he would earn nothing new this year. So you would see there's a difference of 10.6 million. He'd be down. If he plays on the tag next year, he'd be down 12.6. If he played on 2 tags, as long as I threw the numbers in there properly, which I think I did, he'd be down about 8.6 million. And again, we're not taking in any kind of time value considerations or anything like that, but he would be required to sign a contract in free agency at the age of 29 that would pay him 25.136 million. In that first year, and then another 17.5 million in the second year, and that would all have to basically be guaranteed, and that's just to break even. So you'd be looking at a 2-year cash outlay of 42.6 million. That's way more than he got this year. So you would have to expect a real gigantic change in the market for him to be able to earn that type of contract at the age of 29. You always have risk. There's risk of injury, risk of being ineffective. I just looked at some historical comps real quick. Earl Thomas at the age of 28 was a Pro Bowler. He was on IR in 29. Eric Berry was an All-Pro in 28, IR at 29. Matthew was an All-Pro at 28. Palomalu was IR in 28, All-Pro in 29. Cam Chancellor, 12 games in 28. He was on IR at the age of 29. And Rashad Jones was on IR at 28 and a Pro Bowl in 29. So basically you would look at that as there's a risk certainly of injury. We can see those issues in the past. The question would just be, how much would it impact you? Some of these players, it didn't really impact them at all. Palomalu still stayed on his contract. Chancellor, I think, got his new deal after the 12-game season. Jones got his new deal, I believe, after he was on IR. Now that they were pressed on cap stuff and everything else. So I wouldn't say it's impossible for him to get that kind of deal, but I think these numbers would be pretty difficult to earn. He might get one. He's probably not going to get both. So I think this contract that he took here is a better scenario than doing this. I think it would have been difficult if all things go according to plan for him. I think his $70 million that he would earn here ends up being better than what he could have done in a different scenario. Real quick, we go over the comps for him, and you can see the total value here, 80.4. Let's just look at the new money on this. So it's 17.5. Bobby Wagner's at 18. CJ Mosley's at 17. Simmons at 15.25. So obviously you can see I'm including some linebackers here. The reason I'm including the linebackers is because the numbers are so much bigger than Simmons. And I think Bobby Wagner was always going to be a kind of a blocking point for Jamal Adams. I said this when that trade was made, that this was as high as they could go would be the Bobby Wagner salary, and more likely than not would have to be under that unless there was like a seismic shift in the way contracts were going for safeties. There was not. So when you have the top safety at 15.25, and this is clearly a new market that might occur for the safety position, but I think when you look at these numbers, I think it's pretty clear that they're negotiating off these two deals. They're negotiating basically off Wagner as a top, and they're saying, all right, we'll comp you with him, and we'll throw the linebacker one in there because that's kind of what you're dealing with. So the number splits right in between those two at 17.5. He's got some extra money in there that can jump him past Wagner. I forget what the details of that are. You can check out Pro Football Talk for those details. We'll get him up on OTC at some point as well. When you look at the guarantee structure, $38 million here, $35 for Simmons. That was the one thing that I think was based on the safety market, where you had the 40.3 for Wagner and the 51 for Mosley, and you can see the full guarantee numbers are way down. But again, it was important, I think, for Seattle to keep him under Wagner, and that may have limited what Adams could do in that guarantee. So that's why when you get to that $11 million salary that we talked about in 2023, that probably is another reason why Seattle would argue that they could not guarantee that one in February to really hit the home run, $49 million guarantee on the contract, or a little bit less than that, $48 million or so. The reason for that is I think they didn't want to go over that number. So you can see as a percentage of the contract value guaranteed. Now Wagner's is a shorter deal. But if you look at that, it's a much smaller number than the comparable players. Same thing with the full guarantee. Guarantees per year also much, much, much lower. So again, I think that's just protection for Seattle and keeping him under this. I think those are the important things for them, and I think they accomplished it with this here. When you look at the cash flows on the deal, and again, where you bring up these other positions, so you've got 17 for Simmons, and then that's a 25 for Adams. I mean, there's no comparison in year one money. 36 to 32, not much of a comparison. He fits in nicely between Mosley and Wagner. 52.5 fits in very nice. 50 between the 51 and 54 just blows away the Simmons deal. 61, 68, and 70. So he actually surpasses Mosley on the 4-year. As well, so he's going to jump him, throughout, but they make sure that he gets past him on that 4-year as well. You can see the running APYs here. He's $2 million a year more than Simmons. Again, fits in right in between these two. So I think this is where you're dealing with your negotiating points. I think this just happens to be out there for people like you and I to talk about. I don't think this really came up at all. I think it was, where do you fit his numbers in and how do you do it? And I think the big thing for him and why this deal gets done, and it should have been done long ago. I mean, it's ridiculous it took this long to get done. It's this number. This number is so big for money that he's going to earn in the first new year of the contract. That's probably what seals the deal. That allows them to get away from having this number be eye-popping. They don't need this number to be eye-popping. No one really talks about percentage guarantees except for people like me. But it's this. So Seattle gets the numbers that are more in line, I think, with the market once you get to the second year. But I think this is like a blowaway number, that first year front end cash. And I think when you look at contracts from a realistic standpoint, which is the way you should do it, don't focus on these guarantees that people go crazy about. You can look at that, and you can look at that 2023 salary, and you can say, you know what? This is basically fully guaranteed, barring a complete disaster. So when you throw that in there, his legitimate guarantee is $46.4 million. All right, that's the legitimate guarantee on the contract, unless it's disaster. So basically, you would look at this as if Seattle has some type of insurance on him, or maybe you would look at this as Adams having insurance on it that he would have to pay back. However you want to phrase that, I would look at this, if I was doing that deal, I'd say, okay, this is probably my guarantee, regardless of what it is on paper, as long as we don't have a complete disaster. And you know what? Even if you do have a complete disaster, when you go to those alternative scenarios, look at how much better you are if all he does is play 21 and 22. You're 12-6 above where you would have been on the franchise tag. And, all of this is just meaningless at that point, because if you're not good enough for a second tag, you wouldn't be good enough for this. And he wouldn't be good enough to certainly make up this $12.6 million in this year if he was going to get released. So, that to me is just a really good scenario for him as to how this could work out. But the virtual guarantee on this thing is, it's basically 40, what is that, 46? Yeah. So that's why the deal gets done. The virtual guarantee is much higher, fits in between these two. It's realistically, it just kind of fits in there. And it's a lot of money that he's definitely going to earn by next year. And, even if he had to take a pay cut on it, the guarantee is going to end up at more than 38. It's probably going to end up at more than the 40.25. Again, if you were talking worst case scenario, because it would probably be advantageous for them at that point to, restructure his deal versus cutting him outright. So anyway, that's just my take on the Jamal Adams contract. If you have any comments about it, you can let me know. Well, hopefully, again, I'll get to do more of these videos in the future. Nothing for the next week or two, probably. But we'll see if we can do some stuff during the season using the calculators on OTC. Just to start to do some team overviews where you guys can kind of follow along. So if you have any suggestions, you can leave them in the comments, or you can email me or let me know on Twitter. So everyone have a great week, and I'll talk to you all again soon.